Okay. Hope everyone's doing okay today. Let's see, just setting up, getting everything smooth for the day. Okay. We're going to be doing command of evidence questions today because one of my people requested it, and I like to give the people what they want, right? So let's see. I'm just sending this out. It's a nice sunny day today in the city on Saturday. I hope you guys all have nice weather, but aren't missing it too much being inside studying this. Maybe you can do this in a park. I don't know. That would be nice. All right. And we'll get this going in 1 minute. I just have to get the page loaded, and then we'll go from there. All right, so command of evidence, right? I think is one of the harder parts of the reading and writing section. We'll do some practice questions on it. If you have questions on something else, let me know and I can switch to that for a bit. Um, so let's see. I'm just going to share my screen now. Okay, that's it. That's good. Maybe turn this down a bit. Okay, so we'll start with this question here. We just have to do one last thing, and then we're good to go. The material world. That song's stuck in my head today for some reason. Okay, great. And we're all set. So, first question here, right? So, there's two or three types of questions. There is for command of evidence. The one I think most people think about is the one where they give you a chart or a graph, and you have to figure out from there what type of information you're using to solve some sort of statement that they're making, right? And then you're going to have something like this, where you have to take in some study, some claim, and then use some sort of textual evidence to solve it. And then there's the one where they use quotations, right? Like this here. Okay. And that one is also common. I think it's one of the harder ones. They don't come up too much, but we're going to do practice with all the different ones today. Okay. So I'm just making this nice and big so it's legible for everyone because there's a lot going on. And I'll scroll up and down. Okay, so I'll make it a little smaller. Okay. So municipalities' responses to inquiries about potential incentives for firms. Okay, so what I like to do is I read the passage. I don't even really look at the top, even though I just did that. Then I read the question, then I look at the data and I start going back and forth between the data and to answer choices, right? So let's do this one here. In the United States, firms often seek incentives from municipal governments to expand those municipalities. A team of political scientists hypothesized that municipalities are much more likely to respond to firms and offer incentives if expansions can be announced in time to benefit local elected officials than if they can't. The team contacted officials in thousands of municipalities, inquiring about incentives for a firm looking to expand and indicating that the firm would announce its expansion on a date either just before or just after the next election. Okay, so this is one of the hardest ones, right? So we'll do this one, then we'll go to some easy ones, and then we'll keep going from there. But I just want to give you a taste of how it can be. Which choice best describes data from the graph that weaken the team's hypothesis, right? So one thing you got to be careful about is most of the questions ask for things that will support the team's hypothesis, but sometimes you'll get questions that ask for you to weaken the team's hypothesis, okay? And then okay, weakens the team hypothesis. So let's look at the data. A large majority of municipalities that received an inquiry mentioning plans for an announcement before the next election didn't respond to the inquiry. Okay. So first we want to focus on what the team's hypothesis is, right? So with the team's hypothesis, we know what? We know that the team contacted officials inquiring about incentives. They hypothesized right here, right? They hypothesized that municipalities are much more likely to respond to firms and offer incentives if expansions can be announced in time to benefit local elected officials than if they can't. Okay. So the team contacted officials. Let's look at the data. So we're trying to see how something that doesn't prove that, right? So a large majority of the municipalities that received an inquiry from mentioning plans for an announcement before the next election didn't respond to the inquiry. Okay, so that's about before the next election, right? The proportion of municipalities that responded to the inquiry or offered incentives didn't substantially differ across the announcement timing conditions. Okay, that one seems interesting because their point is that they do differ, right? That you're much more likely to respond if the expansions are announced in time to benefit them, right? C, only around half the municipalities that respond to inquiries mentioning plans for an announcement before the next election offered incentives. Okay. That one also doesn't really have as much to do with timing, so I'm not feeling great about it. And then D, of the municipalities that received an inquiry mentioning plans for an announcement date after the next election, more than 1,200 didn't respond, and only around 100 offered incentives. Okay. So again, that doesn't talk about timing conditions. So B seems like the only one. So we just need to check up here if that's true, right? So gray is before election, black is after election, and the response, regardless, right? For this, they're always about the same. So they do not substantially differ. And that weakens the team's hypothesis because they said that people who had more time to respond would respond more, right? So it would be B. So I think this one part of the challenge on this one is just keeping track of the team's hypothesis, keeping track of what's happening in the chart, and then also keeping track of the fact they're asking for it to be weakened, not strengthened, right? So that will be B as in boy. All right. Now we'll go to another one. Okay. Here, I'm just going to try one thing quickly. Let's see if that changes anything. Okay, to make sure they got the nutrition they needed while in space, astronauts of NASA's Gemini missions were given menus for 3 meals a day, meals A, B, and C, and on a 4-day rotating schedule. Looking at the sample of food items from these menus, a student notes that on day one, the menu included blank. Which choice most effectively uses data from the table to complete the statement? Okay. So which choice to complete the statement? Okay. Shrimp cocktail for meal B, hot cocoa for meal C, sugar cookie cubes for meal B, and chicken and vegetables for meal A. Looking at the sample of food items from these menus, a student notes that on day one, the menu included. Okay, so we look at day one, right? The menu included sugar cookie cubes from meal B. So that should be C, right? So this, I mean, I just showed you the big gap, right? The first question was very nuanced, had a lot going on. This one was very straightforward, right? And you should be able to get this one in about maybe a little less than a minute. Not that much longer than it takes you to read the question and answer choices. It is C. Okay. And again, if you have any questions or comments, you always feel free to put it in the stream, in the chat, and we'll try the next one. O Pioneers is a 1913 novel by Willa Cather. In the novel, Cather portrays Alexandra Berkson as having a deep emotional connection to her natural surroundings. Which quotation from O Pioneers most effectively illustrates the claim? So we're looking for a deep emotional connection to natural surroundings, right? So A, she had never known before how much the country meant to her. The chirping of the insects down in the long grass had been like the sweetest music. She had felt as if her heart were hiding down there, somewhere with the quail and the plover and all the little wild things that crooned or buzzed in the sun under long, shaggy ridges. She felt the future stirring. Okay. So that seems like she's emotionally connected to something. So that could be a possibility. B, Alexandra talked to the men about their crops and to the women about their poultry. She spent a whole day with one young farmer who had been away at school and who was experimenting with a new kind of clover hay. She learned a great deal. Okay. So that one, right, doesn't have so much to do with the country. It also doesn't seem very emotional. So I would say right now, A is better than B. Okay. So I would probably eliminate B. Alexandra drove off alone. The rattle of her wagon was lost in the howling of the wind, but her lantern, held firmly between her feet, made a moving point of light along the highway going deeper and deeper into the dark country. Okay, that one's okay, but I feel like A shows more of that connection, right? And then D. It was Alexandra who read the papers and followed the markets, and who learned by the mistakes of their neighbors. It was Alexandra who could always tell about what it had cost to fatten each steer, and who could guess the weight of a hog before it went on the scales closer than John Bergson, her father himself. Okay, so again, not really about the country or emotions. So A and C, right? A gives us more of that emotional connection and more about it being about the country. So we're going to go with A. Okay. Great, great, great. Now we'll go to the next one. To You is an 1856 poem by Walt Whitman. In the poem, Whitman suggests that readers whom he addressed directly have not fully understood themselves, writing blank. Which quotation from To You most effectively illustrates the claim? So again, you want to think, what is the claim? So that's not really a claim, right? In the poem, Whitman suggests that readers have not fully understood themselves. So he's saying readers have not fully understood themselves, and he addresses them directly. So that should be he's speaking in you, right? You have not known what you are. You have slumbered upon yourself all your life. Your eyelids have been the same as closed most of the time. B, these immense meadows, these interminable rivers, you are immense and interminable as they. I should have made my way straight to you long ago. I should have blabbed nothing but you. I should have chanted nothing but you. D, I will leave all and come and make the hymns of you. None has understood you, but I understand you. Okay. So this one here, right? None has understood you. So that one has an understanding part, but it's about them not understanding themselves, not about nothing understanding you. So I would eliminate D. This isn't really about understanding, right? And then B, these immense meadows, these interminable rivers who are immense and interminable as they. That's about being infinite, which could connect to being unable to understand, but it's not about that as directly. And it also doesn't mention that the reader doesn't know about themselves, right? A is the one that says that you have not known who you are. You have slumbered upon yourself. So you're sleeping on yourself, basically, all your life. Your eyelids have been the same as closed most of the time. So it's going to be A. All right. So we will go to the next one. Okay, so I hope you see how these aren't really too bad. It's just about reading carefully, understanding what the claim or the hypothesis is, and then sort of moving forward from there, right? So let's try another one. But before we do that, I just want to try another thing. Sorry again. I'm just, playing around with the tools, figuring it out, I'm a fiddler, but I don't exactly know. Okay. So roasted green chilies are a popular ingredient in Southwestern cuisine, but the traditional roasting method of burning propane is not environmentally friendly. To see if solar power could provide a better alternative, engineer Kenneth Armijo and his team roasted batches of green chilies using between 38 and 42 heliostats, which are devices that concentrate sunlight. The team was successful in reaching the same roasting temperature used in traditional propane roasting, but they found that propane yielded faster results. While the fastest solo roasted green chilies took 6 minutes, batches using propane took only 4. Armijo hypothesizes that they can reduce the roasting time for solo roasted green chilies by using more heliostats. Which finding, if true, would most directly support Armijo's hypothesis? Okay. So again, there's a lot of stuff going on here, but the focus is always on the hypothesis or the it's on the hypothesis or the statement. All right. Hello, all me. Glad that you could join us. All right. So the hypothesis here is that they can reduce the roasting time for solo roasted by using more heliostats. So they used between 38 and 42 heliostats. Let's look at the choice, which finding, if true, would most directly support this. Right? The temperature inside the roasting drum is distributed more evenly when roasting green chilies with solar power than with propane. That's comparing solar power to propane. When we want to compare solar power of one level of heliostats to solar power of another amount of heliostats, right? So that's not going to be A. Attempts to roast green chilies using 50 heliostats yield results in fewer than 6 minutes. That seems strong, right? Because that would show that it's going faster than the 6 minutes here when they were doing between 38 and 42 heliostats. C, green chili connoisseurs prefer the flavor of solar roasted. Okay, that's about preferring the flavor and comparing solar to propane, right? And D, the skins of solar roasted green chilies are easier to peel than the skins of propane roasted green chilies. So again, that is not going to be it. We are at B, right? And again, you could do these along with me as you go. If you have questions, put them in the comments. If you got an answer, you could try to beat me and put the answer in the comments before I get to it. However you want to do it, right? Feel free. So here we're gonna do another one. This one has a chart, but like I said, I don't look at the chart first. I look at the passage and the question. Electric companies that use wind turbines rely on weather forecasts to predict the maximum amount of power in megawatt hours they can generate using wind, so they can determine how much they'll need to generate from other sources. When winds are stronger than they were forecast to be, however, the predicted maximum amount of electricity wind turbines could generate will be too low. For example, the graph shows that for the West region, the winds were. Which choice most effective data from the graph to complete the example? Okay. Strong enough. Okay, so for example, the graph shows that for the West region, the winds were okay, so it's 150 and it's less than the Midwest, right? When winds are stronger than they're forecast to be, however, the predicted maximum amount of electricity wind turbines could generate will be too low. Okay. And then electricity in thousands of hours, amount of additional electricity wind turbines could generate when the winds were stronger than forecast. Okay. So A, strong enough to generate about 150,000 more megawatts of electricity, megawatt hours of electricity from wind turbines. MWH stands for megawatt hours, but you don't need to know that. You could just say MWH, right? B, so weak that the electricity from wind turbines was about 175,000 megawatt hours less than predicted. C, so weak that electricity from wind turbines was about 150,000 megawatt hours less than predicted. And then D, strong enough to generate about 175,000 more megawatt hours of electricity from wind turbines, right? So again, what was the claim they were making? That they can generate using wind, they can determine how much they'll need to generate from other sources. When wind is stronger than were forecast, the predicted amount of electricity wind turbines could generate will be too low. Okay. So the predicted amount, right, would be lower. Okay. Amount of additional electricity wind turbines could generate when winds were stronger than forecast. So this is the additional. So strong enough to generate about 150,000 more megawatts of electricity from wind turbines. So it's not about less than predicted. So it is A, right? So it's just determining the difference between the West and the Midwest and then going from there. That's a terrible drawing. I'll just do A here. All right. Good. We'll do a couple more of these and then we will go on to harder questions. Okay. So here's the next one. And again, if you have a different topic you want to cover, let me know and I will work on that. So the table shows data from paleontologist Angelica Torres's and colleagues' 2021 study of two sets of dinosaur tracks preserved in a fossilized lakebed in Spain. The tracks, referred to as Littoral 6A and Littoral 6B, were left by two individual theropods, dinosaurs that walked on two legs. The team's findings suggest that of the two theropods, the one that left Littoral 6B tracks had a higher maximum mean speed. Okay. Which choice most effectively uses data from the table to complete the claim? Okay, so the claim, right, is suggest that two theropods, that the one left had a higher maximum mean speed. Okay. So what would we see with the higher maximum mean speed, right? This is the higher maximum mean speed. The longer footprint, longer average stride, longer footprint, shorter average stride, shorter footprint, longer average stride, shorter footprint, shorter average stride. So we look at the stride length, they are longer here, and they are shorter here for the footprint. So it should be longer stride length, shorter footprint, which is going to be shorter footprint, longer average stride, C, right? Okay, if you have questions on that, let me know. But again, with these, you want to break down the answer choices bit by bit. So the options are longer footprint versus shorter footprint. So you determine between those two. And then you determine the other two parts, right? Longer average stride versus shorter average stride. And it's nice and conveniently broken up like that in the chart. All right, we'll go to the next one. Let's see. Da, da, da. The Navajo Nation has the largest land area of any tribal nation in the United States, over 27,000 square miles in the Southwest. Because this area is so huge and its communities are located at various elevations, the people of the Navajo Nation can experience different climate conditions depending on where they live. For example, in July, blank. Which choice most effectively uses data from the table to complete the statement? So what happened in July? So this is all about July, and what are we comparing? Are located at various elevations. The people can experience different climate conditions depending on where they live. So I think we were looking for differences, right? The lowest temperature for both Cameron and Tiknos Pass was 65. That doesn't show that they're different conditions. Tuba City's average highest temperature was 94, while Tiknak Pass was 93. That's very close. So I don't think that totally does it. Also, Tuba City had 83, not 94. And Tikrit Nat Pas had 94, not 93. So I don't know what's going on with that one. Rama's average highest temperature was 83 and Cameron's was 99. Okay, that shows a difference, and that's true, right? Rama's 83, Cameron is 99. The lowest temperature was 50 for both Rama and Tuba City. Again, that does not really help us because that's showing similarity when we want differences. So it has to be C. Okay. And now we will go on to, I think, a couple more of these, and then we'll go to the next level. As a monthly newsletter formed in 1969 by a group of Asian American students at the University of California, Los Angeles, GIDRA helped raise awareness about social and political issues concerning the Asian American community on campus and at large. The newsletter had an expansive reach for a publication of its kind. Around 4,000 copies were published each month. A student writing a history paper, however, hypothesizes that GIDRA's influence cannot be measured by the number of newsletters published monthly alone. Which finding, if true, would most directly support the student's hypothesis? Okay. A, the students who initially formed GIDRA each contributed financially to its creation. B, in addition to covering current events, GIDRA was also featured works of art and literature. C, GIDRA was initially based out of the Asian American Studies Center at UCLA. People often give their copies of GIDRA to others once they finish reading the issue. So the hypothesis of the student is what? That GIDRA's influence cannot be measured by the number of newsletters published monthly alone. So this doesn't really have to do with its influence, right? It's about its creation, and it doesn't have to do with the number of people involved. B, in addition to covering current events, GIDRA also featured works. Again, that's not really about that or about initially was based. It's not, this is also about where it's based from, not on its influence. But D, people would often give their copies of GIDRA to others once they had finished reading an issue. That one makes more sense, right? Because that's showing how maybe only 1,000 people were getting it or 4,000 people, but maybe they each gave it to one person who gave it to another person. So it's actually 12,000 people total who are reading it, right? So it will be D as in dog. Okay, now the next one, copper production. Okay. This one I've done many times with students. I don't know why it always comes up, but it's a good one. So I'm glad it's coming up here. Okay. So let's see. Copper had been mined in the US for thousands of years, but large-scale commercial mining in copper rock took off starting in the late 1800s. This was due to several factors. Technological advancements in the mining industry led to improvements in the production of copper. This helped the country keep up with the growing number of people wanting to buy copper starting in the 1890s. At the same time, the growth of the railroad system made the transportation of copper in large batches much easier. Several states saw rapid growth in the production of the resource. For example, okay, so there's which choice most effectively uses the data in the graph to complete the example. So the example is saying that there's a rapid growth in the production of copper, right? So in several states saw the rise. Okay, so these three all go up. So Montana, Arizona, and Michigan. The rise in copper production in Michigan slowed from 1902 to 1909. That's slowing when they're talking about rising. So A wouldn't make sense. B, Montana and Arizona produce more copper than Michigan. Again, that's comparing between two states when you want to compare all the states across time for each other. So it's probably not that. C, fewer than 100 million pounds of copper were produced. Again, that's not about the growth. So even if that were accurate, it doesn't work. C, more than 100 million pounds of copper were produced in Arizona in 1889. Again, not really what we're looking for. It is, so it's probably D. Let's see. Copper production rose significantly from 1889 to 1909 for Arizona, Michigan, and Montana. And that is true, right? They all went up during that time. So it is D. You can say it with me. D as in dog. All right. Now let's go to the next one. If you can hear me, let me know. If you can't hear me, also let me know. Nan Gao and her team conducted multiple surveys to determine participants' level of comfort in a room where the temperature was regulated by a commercial climate control system. Participants filled out surveys several times a day to indicate their level of comfort on a scale from -3, very cold, to +3, very hot, with 0 indicating neutral, neither warm nor cold, and to indicate how they would prefer the temperature to be adjusted. The table shows 3 participants' responses in one of the surveys. According to the table, all 3 participants wanted their room to be cooler. Which choice from the data uses data from the table to complete the statement? Okay. Which choice most effectively? And they each reported the same level of comfort is A. Even though each participant's ratings varied throughout the day was B. But participant 20 reported feeling significantly colder than the other 2 participants did. And D. But participant 1 reported feeling warmer than the other 2 participants did. So 1 and 21 are the same, so it's not that one. There's nothing about varying throughout the day, so it's not B. They didn't report the same level of comfort because one is -2 and the other ones are 1. So it is, but participant 20 reported feeling significantly colder, right? -2 instead of 1. So it is C. All right, so now we're gonna amp it up, go up a little bit in difficulty and see how it goes. Ghost of the Old Year is an early 1900 poem by James Weldon Johnson. In the poem, the speaker describes experiencing an ongoing cycle of anticipation followed by regretful reflection. Blank. Which quotation from the Ghost of the Old Year most effectively illustrates the claim? So before we look at this answer choices, we want to see what the claim is again. And the claim is just that he describes experiencing an ongoing cycle of anticipation followed by regretful reflection. Okay. Hey, I've been there, I think we all have. What does this brazen tongue declare that falling on the midnight air brings to my heart a sense of care akin to fright? The snow has ceased its fluttering flight, the wind sunk to a whisper light, an ominous stillness fills the night, a pause, a hush. It tells of many a squandered day, of slighted gems and treasured clay, of precious stones not laid away, of fields unreaped. And so the years go swiftly reply. Each coming brings ambitions high, and each departing leaves a sigh, linked to the past. Okay, I hope I did a good dramatic reading for you all. So we're looking for something where when something is coming, right, when you're anticipating, you feel excited, and then afterwards you feel down and sad, or at least disappointed or regretful. Okay, so this one doesn't have to do with that, right? This just talking about what a brazen tongue declares. This is about snow having ceased its fluttering flight and the wind sinking, right? So it's not again about the anticipation and the regret. Tells of many squandered days. So he does seem to have squandered days if you're feeling regretful, but of slighted gems and treasured clay. But we don't get a sense that this is in the past, and we don't get a sense that there was that excited anticipation, right? So then let's look at D just to make sure, but it should be that one. And so the years go swiftly by, each coming brings ambitions high, and each departing leaves a sigh linked to the past. And yeah, it is D, right? When they come, they raise your ambitions, and when they depart, they leave you with a sigh, right? A sigh can be an expression of regret or remorse. And then that's linked to the past. So it is D. Okay, if you have questions on that, let me know. Now we can go to the next one. In the 1970s, a roughly 60,000-year-old piece of a hyena bone marked with 9 notches was discovered at a site in western France, once inhabited by Neanderthals. Although many believe that only modern humans develop systems for notating numbers, one archaeologist asserts that this artifact may be a sign that Neanderthals also recorded numerical information. The notches on the bone are unevenly spaced but approximately parallel. The microscopic analysis reveals that they were made with a single stone tool. According to the archaeologist, this suggests that the notches were all made one at a time by one individual as a means of counting something, which finding, if true, would most directly weaken the underlined claim. So again, we're trying to weaken the claim, right? Not strengthen it. So the claim is going to be, interestingly, for some reason, this isn't underlined, but I believe it's the final part, right? And the bone are unevenly spaced. So this suggests that notches were all made at one time by one individual. So parallel lines are a common feature in modern humans' early systems for recording numerical information. More than 9 approximately parallel notches made with a different stone tool are present on another artifact found at a site in Western France. It would have taken careful effort to make evenly spaced lines on bones with the stone tools typically used by Neanderthals. And D, decorative art discovered at another Neanderthal site in Western France primarily features patterns of unevenly spaced parallel lines. Okay. So we're looking to weaken the claim, and the claim is that they've been together for a long time. Or not together for a long time, but they're together because they were made by one person at one time. Hmm. As a means of counting something. Okay. So A, parallel lines are a common feature in modern. Okay. So that doesn't work because that could just be saying, that would support the claim. Because if that's something that happens often, then A is saying why it would happen often, right? Because it's a common feature. B, more than 9 approximately parallel notches made with a different stone tool are present. Again, that doesn't really have anything to do with the counting. It doesn't weaken it. It would have taken careful effort to make, again, maybe it does take careful effort and it's important to do that way. So that's why they do it that. So decorative art discovered at another Neanderthal site in Western France primarily features patterns. So here it helps because it does decorative art, which means it doesn't have a purpose outside of aesthetics, right? Outside of beauty. So they're not using it to count, they're using it to be beautiful. And if that's the case, that weakens the hypothesis that someone is using it to count. Okay. Now we can go to the next one. Again, I hope you're all enjoying this um, quick lesson on this stuff. All right. So in 1967, the US Congress created the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which in turn created National Public Radio. Okay. Sorry, just having some technical issues, which in turn created National Public Radio. Right up. Sorry again. Okay. This one will begin again in 1 second. I just need this to get loaded. Okay, there it is. Sorry. In 1967, the US Congress created the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which in turn created National Public Radio. NPR began producing and distributing high-quality news and cultural programming to affiliate stations across the United States in 1971. In a research paper, a student claims that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and NPR were inspired by the British broadcasting system, which had been established in the 1920s, right? BBC, we know that, the BBC miniseries and PBS documentaries, Ken Burns, things like that. So Which quotation from a work by a historian would be the most effective evidence for the student to include in support of his claim? So the claim is that they were inspired by BBC, right? So where do we have evidence for that? So A, although the BBC had begun as a private corporation, politicians successfully argued to make it a public company because they believed in a public broadcaster could help build national unity in the aftermath of World War One. B, for many decades, the BBC had no competition since it held Britain's only broadcasting license, whereas in the United States, the corporations for public broadcasting launched NPR in a broadcasting market already filled with competitors. C, Congress's embrace of publicly funded broadcasting reflected a common belief among the U.S. politicians that the role of government was not only to ensure people's safety and liberty, but also to enrich people's lives in other ways. Okay. And then D, the goal of the BBC was to support British democracy by promoting an informed citizenry. And US legislatures believed that ensuring access to high quality programming could do the same for democracy in the United States. All right. So I'll give you all a second to think on this one. Okay, so we're looking for them copying the BBC, right? So I think we want something that connects the US and the British. So A doesn't work because it just talks about how the BBC was begun, right? And how they later became a public company, but it's not about how the US sort of thought about it through that lens. B, for many decades, the BBC had no competition to help Britain's only broadcasting license, whereas in the United States, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting launched NPR. Again, that's about the differences between them and how the BBC didn't have competition and the US did, or NPR did. And then we have C, Congress's embrace of publicly funded broadcasting reflected a common belief. Okay, but that has nothing to do with the BBC, so that doesn't help. But D is the best one, right? Because it tells us how the goal of the BBC was to make for an informed citizenry and how the US believed that they could do the same thing, right? So they see it in the UK and think, oh, we can do that. So they're taking that idea from them, which is the student's claim. All right, we'll do about, let's see. We'll keep going for about 20 more minutes and then we will go from there. Okay. Suggestions for improving a university. Gabriel Adams and colleagues reviewed suggestions for improving a university that had been submitted to the university's president. They coded each suggestion as additive. The idea suggested adding something new to the university. Subtractive, the idea suggested removing something from the university. Neither additive nor subtractive. Or invalid, the idea was not comprehensible. The data illustrated, excuse me, the data illustrated people's tendency to overlook the possibility of removing things to achieve improvements. Okay, so we're trying to achieve improvements. Which choice most effectively uses data to complete the statement? So they're overlooking the possibility of removing things. So we look at how small subtractive is, right? People are mostly not thinking about subtracting things to make improvements. It's mostly additive. Some are invalid, so we can't understand. And then there's some that are neither subtractive or, and then very few think subtractive. So around 175 suggestions were coded as neither additive nor subtractive, but whereas around 575 were coded as additive. That doesn't work, right? Because it is not about being additive. It's not trying to highlight how much there was additive, it's trying to highlight how little there was subtractive. More than 350 suggestions were coded as invalid, whereas fewer than 100 suggestions were coded as subtractive. So that could be true because that's showing how little subtractive there were in comparison to invalid, which you would think wouldn't be that high. You would hope they weren't making that many incomprehensible suggestions. See, Are fewer than 100 suggestions are coded as subtractive, whereas more than 550 suggestions are coded as additive. Okay, that's sort of like B. It might be stronger because there's a bigger gap and it's really focused on subtractive versus additive, which I think is a good contrast. D. Around 575 suggestions were coded as additive, whereas around 175 suggestions were coded as subtractive. Okay, so that's just not true because the subtractive is less than 100. So that one we can eliminate. This one we can eliminate, and then we're between B and C, right? Which is where we want to be. We want to get to a place where we're choosing between two answers. And then with practice, you'll get good at choosing the better one. And the better one here is C, right? That's making the clear case of how big a drop there is between them. And it's good to compare additive versus subtractive more than invalid versus subtractive, because invalid, maybe it was just, if you didn't know the rest of the chart, it would tell you less. But the additive versus subtractive is very clear contrast. Okay. Although many songbirds build open cupped nests, some species build domed nests with roofs that provide much more protection. Many ecologists have assumed that domed nests would provide protection from weaker conditions and thus would allow species that build them to have larger geographic ranges than species that build open nests do. To evaluate this assumption, a research team led by evolutionary biologist Ileana Medina analyzed data for over 3,000 species of songbirds. Which finding from Medina and her colleagues' studies of true would most directly challenge the assumption in the underlying task? So challenging is similar to weakening, right? You're doing something that calls into question the claim. So many ecologists have assumed that domed nests would provide protection from weather conditions and thus would allow species that build them to have larger geographic ranges than species that build open nests do. Okay, that's not exactly what we're looking for. I mean, that's interesting, but let's see. Species that build open nests tend to have higher extinction rates than species that build domed nests. That doesn't help, right? Because that would support the claim because they're saying it gives you protection. Okay. And then you have B, species that build open nests tend to be smaller in size than species that build domed nests. Okay, interesting. C, species that build open nests tend to use fewer materials to build their nest than species that build domed nests do. And then D, species that build open nests tend to have larger ranges than species that build domed nests do. All right, so many ecologists, well, that's the one I think, right? Because it says it would allow the species that build them to have larger geographic ranges. Have larger geographic ranges than the species that build dome nests. So that goes against what they're saying. So it should be D. And we can just check it quickly, right? Species that build open nests, again, we said that goes against what they're saying, or that supports them, and we're trying to go against them. Species that build open nests tend to be smaller. Again, about size doesn't really matter. Species that build open nests tend to use fewer materials. Again, it's not about the materials, it's about the range. So we are left with D. Okay. On to the next one. In a survey of public perceptions of energy use, researchers Shanzine Attari and her team asked respondents to name the most effective action ordinary people can take to conserve energy. The team categorized each action as either an efficiency or a curtailment and found that respondents tended to have named curtailments more often than they did efficiencies. For example, 19.6% of respondents stated that the most effective way to conserve energy is to turn off the lights while only blank. So that's a curtailment. And we're looking for efficiency, right? 6.3 respondents said it was most effective to use efficient cars or hybrids. So that's a 6.3 went with the changed thermostat. So that's not the one we're looking for. 2% of respondents said it was most effective to change the thermostat setting. That's not what they said. So that's also eliminated. I love it when they're just factually incorrect, right? It makes your life a lot easier. 12.9% of respondents said it was most effective to use bike or public transportation. Yeah, but that's a curtailment. We're looking for a comparison between curtailment and efficiency. So then we're going to have the last one here. 3.6% of respondents said it was most effective to use efficient light bulbs. Yes, that's it. That's the efficiency that only 3%, 6% said. So we're going to go with D. Hello, glad you could join us. All right, we're going to do about 10 more minutes of this. Feel free to look back on this, and if you have any questions on this or anything else, even just general SAT strategy or what resources to use for the test, let me know, and I can quickly answer them for you here. Born in 1891 to a Quechua-speaking family in the Andes Mountains of Peru, Martin Chamby is today considered to be one of the most renowned figures of Latin American geography. In a paper for an art history class, a student claims that Chamby's photographs have considered suitable ethnographic value. In his work, Chamby was able to capture diverse elements of Peruvian society, representing his subjects with both dignity and authenticity. This is not a PSAT. It is practice SAT questions, but not a full formatted PSAT. And it's just focused on command of evidence questions. Do you have any questions on the PSAT? Okay. So which finding, if true, would most directly support the student's claim? Okay, so what's the student's claim here? Right? A student claims that Chamby's photographs have considerable ethnographic value. In his work, Chamby was able to capture diverse elements of Peruvian society, representing his subject with both dignity and authenticity. So some of the people and places Chamby photographed had long been popular subjects. Okay, so that doesn't help with D. A. Chamby took many commissioned photo portraits of wealthy Peruvians, but he also produced hundreds of images carefully documenting people, sites, and customs of indigenous communities in the Andes. Okay. That one seems like it could be possible, so I'm going to eliminate D for now. B. Chamby's photographs demonstrate a high level of technical skill, as seen in his strategic use of illumination to create dramatic light and shadow contrasts. Okay, that's about his technical skill. That's not about him capturing a diverse element of Peruvian society. C. During his lifetime, Chamby was known and celebrated both within and outside his native Peru, as his work was published in places like Argentina, Spain, and Mexico. No, that's about where his work is published, not about what it focuses on. So we're going to go with A. Okay. Great. So we have just a few more questions and then we'll be done for the day. An Ideal Husband is an 1895 play by Oscar Wilde. In the play, which is a satire, Wilde suggests that a character named Lady Gertrude Chiltern is perceived as both extremely virtuous and unforgiving. As is evident when another character says blank, which quotation from An Ideal Husband most effectively illustrates the claim? Okay. So the claim is she's extremely virtuous and unforgiving. Lady Chiltern is a woman of the very highest principles. Okay, that goes with the virtuous part. I am glad to say I'm a little too old now myself to trouble about setting a good example, but I always admire people who do. That doesn't really tell us she's unforgiving, but okay, at least that does part of it. Do you know, Lady Chiltern, I don't mind you're talking morality a bit. Morality is simply the attitude we adopt towards people whom we personally dislike. Okay, see, Lady Chiltern does not know that weakness or temptation is. I am of clay like other men. She stands apart as good women do, pitiless in her perfection, cold and stern, and without mercy. And D, Lady Chiltern, you are a sensible woman, the most sensible woman in London, the most sensible woman I know. Okay, so the answer here, all right, if we look, this one tells us that she stands apart as good women do. She's perfect. She does not have weakness. So like this one where it says she has high principles, it gives us the virtuous part. But then also C tells us she's cold and stern without mercy and pitiless. So that tells us that she's unforgiving. So D doesn't have anything to do with it. B doesn't. A does a little bit, but ultimately it is C that does both parts, right? And again, I want you to focus on how you break down the claim into two pieces as both, and then you go into the answer. You break down each answer by two pieces, right? You want to make things granular for yourself, not these vague concepts. Be specific. Okay. Now let's go to the next one. To test the effects of nitrogen fertilizer on cantaloupe production, researchers grew cantaloupe plants and harvested their fruit over 3 years. And each year, half the plants were grown using a nitrogen fertilizer. And the other half were grown using a control fertilizer that contained no nitrogen. The researchers concluded that the nitrogen fertilizer increases cantaloupe production yield. Which choice best describes data in the graph that supports the researchers' conclusion? So they concluded, right, that nitrogen increases cantaloupe yield. So in every year the experiment, plants treated with nitrogen fertilizer had a yield of or at least 30 pounds per acre. That could help, but it doesn't compare them. And I think we were looking for something that'll compare them. In every other experiment, plants treated with nitrogen fertilizer had a greater yield than did plants treated with the control fertilizer. Okay. So control fertilizer, nitrogen, that's true, and that does do the comparison. The 2018 yield for plants treated with control fertilizer was greater than the 2019 yield. So that's comparing across years when we want to be comparing nitrogen versus not nitrogen. So right now we can say A and C are wrong. B looks like the winner, but let's check D. The yield for plants treated with nitrogen fertilizer increased from 2017 to 2018. Again, that's comparing across years, not between nitrogen and not nitrogen. So we go with B. All right, we'll do one last one, and then that'll be it for today. Okay, rows and tables may not add up to 100 due to rounding. Thank you for that. Georgia Tech roboticists Diara Bryant and Ayana Howard, along with ethicist Jason Borenstein, were interested in people's perceptions of robots' competence. They recruited participants and asked them how likely they think it is that a robot could do the work required in various occupations. Participants' evaluations varied widely depending on which occupation was being considered. For example, okay, so their evaluations vary widely depending on the career, right? Okay. 47% of participants believe that it is somewhat or very likely that a robot could work effectively as a teacher, but 37% of respondents believe that it's somewhat or very likely that a robot could do so. 9% of participants were neutral about whether a robot could effectively work effectively as a television news anchor, which is the same percent of participants who were neutral when asked about a robot working as a surgeon. So that doesn't really work because we're looking for differences, right? The varying widely part. 82% of participants believe that it is somewhat or very likely that a robot could work effectively as a tour guide, but only 16% believe that it is somewhat or very likely that a robot could work as a surgeon. And then D, 62% of participants believe that it's somewhat or very likely that a robot could work as a firefighter. So that one doesn't compare across jobs. C looks like the right one because it's comparing across jobs and shows how different they are. A is saying that two jobs are the same. And then, or sorry, B is saying the two jobs are the same. And then A, 47% of participants believe that it's somewhat or very likely that a robot could work effectively as a teacher, but 37% believe that it's somewhat. Okay, so that one doesn't really work, right? So then it should be C, right? Because that's comparing across jobs. When you compare across jobs, you want that big difference because they're saying they vary widely, right? And we're going to go with C. Okay, so that is it for today. I'll be doing another one next week and the week after that. helping you all prepare for the October test. If you have any topics you want to cover, let me know. I've done a lot of questions and YouTube videos that you could watch. If you ever have any question you want to just put in the comments, put them in there. I'll answer it with a video or with a comment myself. I hope this helped you today. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll talk to you all soon. Bye.